Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we will go to the South Bay. We will go to the South Bay to Los Gatos to see what is going on with the Vice Mayor, Rob Moore. Rob, thanks for joining us today. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background and what led you to run for office a few years ago.
Yeah, first, thanks, Dan, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what's going on in our little town. And yeah, we are the South Bay. I think we're the bottom of the South Bay, perhaps, but we are the Bay Area. I was elected about 2.5 years ago. I was elected in November of 2022, and I was elected at the age of 24, definitely young for a political office. And it's been the experience of a lifetime. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I feel like one of the things that surprised me most is how much I feel like I've been able to get done. I had spent a little bit of time in DC doing congressional work, then came to the state, worked for state level elected officials, and have even done a little bit of international development work for the United Nations Foundation. And all those levels, I felt like the further away you got from the community, the less of an impact you were making. And so when I came to local government, that's a huge part of what drew me to local government is if I can convince two of my colleagues, there's 5 of us on our council, if I can convince 2 of my colleagues about anything, we can do pretty much anything. And so that, I think, is a really great thing about local government. I've gotten to work on a lot of exciting things in terms of social services to some important budget work to housing, all kinds of big things going on in our small town. So yeah, it's been great. And just by a little bit of background, the town of Los Gatos is about 33,000 people. We are a town, and the residents of our town feel strongly about that. Interestingly, and I learned this in a political science class when I was at Cal Poly, there's no difference between a town and a city. It's just a name. But we're a great little spot. We have the headquarters of Netflix in our town, so that's one of the big things that we have. But it's an interesting juxtaposition between being right on the cusp of big tech Silicon Valley, but also we're nestled in the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains and have definitely a little bit more rural than some other communities around us.
There's others that are strong believers in that. I know that the mayor of Danville will say, we are the town of Danville, not the city of. You're young. You're probably one of the 2 youngest politicians currently in the Bay Area. Give us a perspective. What is it like? How do people treat you, both the electorate and your colleagues, in terms of the perspective you're bringing? And that'll be the second part of the question. What perspective do you bring to the table?
I appreciate the question. It is interesting. It's definitely a bit of a change. I'm the only council member on my council younger than the age of 60. And so I'm 26 now. So it's definitely a difference. I would say starting with when I was running, I would say there were every so often you would get someone that would say you're too young, wouldn't take me seriously, all of that. But I found that actually to be pretty uncommon. I would say more often folks were excited to have a young person in the community who wanted to get involved and bring the perspective of somebody that grew up in the town to the government. I would say overall, I would actually say it was a benefit. There were folks that were dismissive, but I would say more often there were people that were supportive. And then when I got on the council, I would say that same sort of dismissiveness was there sometimes, right? It existed, but the interesting thing about government is it's an outcomes thing, right? Well, what matters in government is what we can do with government. When I think pretty quickly, everybody on the council, staff, community had to learn that I was a person with one vote, just like my colleagues. And so if you chose to be dismissive of me, it was probably to your peril, and not to say that in any sort of egotistical way, but truly, I'm just one of the people that has a vote on the council. I think pretty quickly people got that whether or not you think I'm too young, I'm in the job now, and you have to deal with that for better or worse. And so in terms of perspective and what I've brought because of that, I think some of the things I have been focused on are a little bit different. We talk about a few different things. One is when it comes to housing, I don't know this for a fact. I haven't looked at every single council member from our town was incorporated in 1887, but in recent history, I'm the only renter that I'm aware of that's been on the council. And that's despite about a third of our town being renters. We've had historically lots of folks who are homeowners in the downtown, and I'm a renter on the other side of town. I live in a fourplex, you're in it now. And I am super supportive of that sort of housing in terms of bringing more options for people, more affordability for people, allowing folks like teachers and firefighters to live in our community. And I think it's a little bit different. I think the town is having to evolve alongside the state in terms of housing politics. That's a whole can of worms, obviously. And I think some of the things the state is doing are necessary and some of them are bad, frankly. And that's, again, a whole can of worms. But I am supportive of building new housing, and that hasn't always been the case on our council. In terms of other issues, I care a lot about taking care of our most vulnerable populations, and so I've spent a lot of time on our council investing in homelessness services for older adults, services for food insecure folks, and we created a really, what I considered to be a very innovative program called the Homeless Hotel Program. We actually just call it a hotel program now, which during severe weather houses homeless folks. It's like our own little Project Room Key, Project Home Key, but we do it with town funds internally, and I think it's been very successful. Those have been some of the things. Maybe the last thing I'll touch on is I also care a lot about making sure that I'm not the last young person to serve on the Los Gatos Town Council, and I spend a lot of my time trying to mentor young people. I created, when I took on the vice mayor role at the beginning of this year, I decided that I wanted to do something new and use that role to do more for the community. I created what I call the Young Leaders Group. It's a group of 35 high school students I meet with every other week, and we get together and talk about issues going on both in the community and more nationwide, and just have discussions about what's going on in the minds of young people. It's been awesome. I thought there wasn't going to be a whole lot of interest in it. I ended up having over 150 kids apply, which was shocking. I thought I wouldn't be able to fill the room, and I had to turn students away, which I was struggled with. But I created that group as, it's funny, we're doing a podcast here, as an antithesis to like Andrew Tate and some of the sort of like bro podcast pulling people to the alt-right, and trying to create an in-person space for young people to engage in talking about some of these questions that are going on for them, that are like really legitimate questions, but do it in a healthy and productive way.
This podcast is just about telling stories of our towns and our community in the Bay Area, and this is less about persuasion of any particular issue. How is the city doing with its housing element? Are you seeing new development as a result? Are there places to fill in that rural community? What do you see?
Yeah, good question. We're seeing a lot of housing proposals in Los Gatos. So from my understanding, Los Gatos is a little bit unique in terms of how much the builder's remedy has come into play in our town. We have 15 large scale, at least for our community, large scale builder's remedy proposals in Los Gatos pending right now. That's more than any other town that I'm aware of. And we're proportionally, maybe per capita, right? Okay. It's been super interesting and challenging. It's the builder's remedy, SB 330, all the changes to state housing law are, I think, present such frankly, a challenge. I think again, I talk to folks about this all the time. I just had a community meeting with about 60 folks about a builder's remedy project that's right next to where they live. And what I start with is the intentions, I think, were good, right? The state of California has a housing shortage. For the last 40, 50 years, California has not built enough housing to keep up with how many jobs are here, how many people are here, how much this is a highly desirable place to live that people want to build their lives in. And in the past, we had things like starter homes, right? People my age could put a down payment on a home, buy a condo, right? The condos in Los Gatos are $1 million, $1 million plus, right? And so that's just not really within my line of sight right now. $1 million maybe, but the average price of a home in Los Gatos is well over $2 million. And so I do think the housing affordability problem is serious. Now,
actually, as of last month, it was $3,060,000 in Los Gatos for a single family home.
There, okay, yeah, that sounds right for average single family home. I think that's, yeah, and I would love to live in a single family home one day. I think there's like this funny misconception out there that young people don't want to live in single family homes. Lots of people want to live in single family homes. That sounds nice. But all to say, we're facing a lot of builder's remedy SB 330 applications. Some of them are fine and tolerable, and others are not. We have one development application, I don't know how serious it is, that is a 13-story building on a 1-acre parcel and directly adjacent to single family homes. And I think that's part of the real struggle, is when these large developments, even doesn't have to be 13 stories, we have a few 7, 8-story buildings that are proposed directly next to single family homes, that if you're living in that single family home, regardless of if you're a YIMBY or a NIMBY, that probably wasn't what you thought would be there when you bought your home. I think that you can, as a baseline sort of position, and figuring out the ways to meet our need for housing, but not disrupting the lovely place Los Gatos is to live, I think is the real challenge we're dealing with. And what compounds that challenge is the degree to which the town doesn't have control. I think that's the real struggle, is that in the past, these would be more negotiations, right? Developers and the government would go back and forth and you'd get somewhere in the middle. And some developers now are taking a real hard line on, I'm going to build my 13-story tower next to your single family home. That's a challenge, and the town has to figure out where to pick our battles, which developments we're willing to go to court on, which ones we're willing to tolerate.
And given that it's builder's remedy, and there's a number of court cases, particularly from Southern California, which was faster at their housing element, are there a number you're just challenging for that? Or what is the city's sort of strategy?
We've challenged a few on technicalities. What I would say is, or maybe technicalities isn't exactly right, but we've challenged a few developments on what I would consider to be legitimate disagreements on interpretations of existing law, right? We have one of the big things there's a disagreement on is how you interpret the 90-day review cycles. And not to get too deep into this, but when somebody presents a builder's remedy project, the town has 180 days to review the development. We get back to the developer with sort of our comments and feedback. And then they have, what the state law says is the developer has 90 days to come back and revise and respond to what the town has said, and then we move forward. How not all the developers in Los Gatos have taken this argument, though maybe they have, but a few developers in Los Gatos have said that instead of it being a single sort of 90-day review period, the developers actually get infinite 90-day review periods. And the way the law is written, I think it's pretty clear. It says or the 90-day review period, but the developers are making this argument that it's not one, it's infinite. I think there's two big issues with that. One is that then why have a review period at all? Why not just say you get to get back to us whenever you want? Why? And that would really, I think, hinder the town's ability to have any sort of, even apply like objective standards and things to the development proposals. But I think the second piece is, I think the community, developers, the town, everyone wants some certainty around timelines for these projects. When you are saying, we're just going to take however long we feel like to get back to you on these comments and then move our project forward in the process or not, I start to worry that some of these developers might be proposing these projects not in good faith, that they don't actually intend to develop the project anytime soon. And at that point, I think we'd have to rethink if you're not going to do the project, that's fine. If you're going to do the project, okay. But I think it introduces a whole extra level of uncertainty in a very uncertain process already. And I think that's how the town's, I think, been approaching it so far, is trying to gain more certainty in the process. But then we have approved one SB 330 development that was redeveloping a motel into about 150 units. But so far, the ones we've seen are not the really big ones. It's 150 units that are, they're 3-story condos. So that's not, I think, where the town's going to draw lines. There's some different developments that I think we're maybe more concerned about.
Yeah, and that is, like you said, it's definitely one of the higher number of builder remedy projects. And is that just because it's a desirable location? And in the previous decade, that there was a lot of NIMBYs, people who didn't want to build housing on the council kind of thing, and there was a back pile of people kind of waiting?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think there's definitely some of the latter point that the town has not historically allowed much development, but this is a highly desirable place to build and live. And so the town in some ways is ripe for development. So I think that's part of it. Another part of it is that the town council took a very long time to get our housing element through the state process. And I think that can largely be attributed to mistakes the council made. And one of, I think our biggest mistake in the process was not listening to what HCD was telling us. HCD would come to the town and say, hey, your housing element's looking good, right? But you need to reduce parking minimums. You need to allow for by right 100% affordable. You need to allow for whatever. Pick the thing. They asked for a lot. I will be the first person to admit they asked for a lot, but they were telling us exactly what we needed to do. And unfortunately, and so my philosophy was HCD is going to win this battle, right? They have the backing of the state attorney general, the governor. What they are telling us is what we need to do to get this thing approved. And unfortunately, there was a division on the council with some folks thinking, no, we can drag our feet and we don't have to do what they say on parking minimums. That's not allowed. We don't have to do what they say on allowing multifamily housing in the R3 zone. All these little things that they're giving us direct feedback on. And my thing the whole time was, I think we need to build a lot more housing, but the way I want to do it is to have control over the process. I think it benefits the town to get the housing element approved. The developments that we get are ones that we have some level of control over. And unfortunately, the folks that were really anti-housing allowed the process to get dragged out further and further. And so we got actually on the very last day, I think before we had our housing element certified, we got a builder project. Our window was so much longer to do builder's remedy that I think a lot more folks got in. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit from housing and talk about social services. It's an area you talked to me about. The city is heavily focused on engaging local government to support the community. Talk a little bit about what is Los Gatos doing and how are you being innovative in that way?
I appreciate the question. I think one step back, my professional job right now is I work for the county of Santa Clara. So I work as a policy aide for one of the 5 county supervisors. And historically, counties have been who does pretty much all social services. That's the model, right? Is that counties do social services, they do healthcare, and towns do housing and roads and things. I think as time has gone on, the need for social services and meeting the individual needs of communities has grown significantly. The town, for the last, I think, decade or so, has had what I consider to be a really great program in our community grants program. We set aside, depending on the year, between $100,000 and $500,000 to give out to community nonprofits to do services that the town believes in and supports, but doesn't have the capacity to come in house. Right? We support food pantries. We support folks giving showers to homeless folks. We support folks giving care to low-income people that have memory loss and dementia, right? We support organizations. Last year, we supported an organization that was able to support of the town, bought 30 or 40 generators to have in case of an emergency, because a lot of folks in the town live up in the hills and they lose power a lot during an emergency. We try to do a lot with the limited money we have. One of the things I've been really proud of is this hotel program that now actually is in-house, but it's a partnership with the faith community and nonprofits and the town. And I think those sort of partnerships have been something that have really excited me, and I think allow us to do a lot more. And yeah, I think we're super fortunate to have a really strong sort of nonprofit community and people that are willing to step up. It's been great. I'm super pleased with how the town council's been investing in that.
That's cool. And just shows you how we all have to work together and innovate to solve some of these issues. You can't be waiting for DC or Sacramento or your county to be helping. If you like this episode, please hit subscribe and leave us a review. One sentence helps more people find us. I want to come back to your perspective as a young millennial.
I was born in 1998, so they call us zillennials.
You have an interesting perspective. You grew up with tech as part of your everyday life, with email, with streaming services, with cell phones and smartphones. How does that change when you get into government where some cities still have server rooms and they haven't even moved to the cloud, where you've got Chat GPT taking over AI products galore in the government markets? Give us your perspective on that.
It's a good question, and it is interesting. I think as a young person, sometimes we take for granted that like most people that are alive today didn't grow up with cell phones in their pockets. When I got to 6th grade, and my parents bought me a little flip phone, and I was able to text and do all the things, and that was new. And then get to high school, and I don't know when I got an iPhone, but at some point in high school, got an iPhone, and that's like a brand new technology, brand new for little 16-year-old brains. I think it's absolutely shaped how I think about government and politics. One thing I'll start with is see tech as a tool in many ways to do my job better. And so I think one of the most important roles of an elected official is to communicate with the community about what is going on in the government. We had a town council meeting last night. It went until about 1 a.m. I bet I think there were 2 people left in the audience by the end of the meeting, and I bet there weren't a whole lot of people streaming in on the Zoom. And so part of my role is then to distill that information and communicate it to a broader audience who aren't watching every town council meeting, because that's my job, and they are part of the community, want to be engaged, but don't need to know all the minutiae. One of the things that I do that I really enjoy, and I think people in the community find valuable, is I write a newsletter every month. That's not unique, but I think the way that I do my newsletter is a little bit unique. I go through and say, here's the 3 big things that the council did in the last month. Here are the big 3 things coming up. Here are some events going on in the community, some announcements, and what I've been up to. I shout out small businesses. I let people know when I do monthly coffees. I try to do regular happy hours. It's a way to be more communicative with the residents. I have about 10,000 people on that email, and it gets read by about half of them every month. So that's pretty good. Yeah. And it was very interesting. That was new for a council member to be doing when I joined the council. And so there were some folks who didn't like that I was doing that. There was pushback on the fact that I was writing a newsletter and giving the perspective of somebody on the council. And I got code of conduct complaints for speaking on behalf of the council in inappropriate ways. And most of this sort of went away. But it was interesting. Our town policies didn't say anything really about online communication for council members. We're a small-ish town. It hadn't come up. It's the same with social media, right? We have a pretty old, outdated social media policy that says the things you can and can't be doing, and in some ways is very restrictive. And so I'm not going to not have an Instagram and Facebook to be able to talk to people. And so I think that's been a sort of interesting thing to navigate. It exists with more traditional media too. If the press asks me for a quote, if they want to interview me, if they want me to go on TV, I say yes, because I think that's my job. I think it's important for elected officials to be transparent and open with the public about what's going on. And there are other folks who are on the council and in the government and in the town who are less comfortable with that. They don't see that as the role. I think historically, Los Gatos had a lot of council members who I would consider to be very uber insular. So they wouldn't join like any regional meetings. They wouldn't talk to regional press. It was all just like hyper local. I don't think that's helpful. I think as much as we can tell our story about why the town of Los Gatos is a great place to live and work and play, we should be doing that. Yeah, it's been a sort of interesting thing to navigate.
Yeah, I think that's great to understand. And I know there's been court rulings in recent years, like if you have a personal X account or Facebook account, but you're a public official making it an official comment, how does that go into the public records request? Do people
Right.
have rights to that? And you got to remember, and I'm even as you're raising kids, that once you put something out there in social media, it's there,
Absolutely.
right, to haunt you forever in a way. Talk about tool for the city, right? Do you advocate for embracing new technology, for pushing city staff for ways to improve themselves? Do you see Los Gatos as being a leader, a follower, in between?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my honest answer is probably somewhere in between, though I would like us to be more of a leader. I think there are certain things we are leading on. A few things that I can name are one of the things that I'm super proud of. This is a super random, small, like policy win that I had. But when I first got on the council, I worked with our then town manager and public works director to change our pedestrian crosswalk signs to be pedestrian leading, which is when the crosswalk walk sign goes on 3 to 5 seconds before the light changes for cars. It was changing a little piece of code in how you do the crosswalks and things. And I think it's made a big difference. They are shown to be way safer for pedestrians because before the light changes, you have a pedestrian out in front of the cars so people know they're there. I think it's those like things that we can make real progress on at a bigger level. Some of the things we're trying to get innovative are on we're thinking a lot about emergency preparedness in Los Gatos because we are adjacent to the hillsides. Wildfire is a big risk in Los Gatos. We've had lots of wildfires. And so we talk a lot about different technologies we can employ, and we're using some of them like early detection technology to have monitors up in the hillsides, having things like communication systems that can broadcast loudly when there's an emergency, things like that. And so I think those are important things we're working on. In terms of like real emerging technologies, you want to talk about AI, we had an interesting conversation. I'm on the finance commission for the town, and the finance commission recommended that the town do a comprehensive financial assessment, essentially, right? That we want to do this sort of deep dive into our finances, get a better sense of where our finances are going 5 years down the line. And we have a guy on our finance commission who is a very smart Stanford finance person. And he said, hey, we should ask in our RFP what ways the firm that we hire is going to be using artificial intelligence to map some of this out. And that sort of brought up, oh, we don't have policy of any kind on AI, whether it's good or bad, ambivalent, whatever. And so that's something now I'm trying to think about. I think regardless, like this commissioner suggested, it's good to be transparent about it. But do we want people to be using it? Do we not want people to be using it? I don't know how the town actually feels about it. I'm sure there are employees that are using ChatGPT at their desk, sure of that. And I think one of the most challenging parts of all of this is that government, I have found one of the things that I think is people don't think a lot about with local government, but it's just sort of part of it. Local government is by its nature often reactionary. It's just how it goes. And you can like that or not like that, but we react when a housing proposal is proposed, right? We react when a street falls apart, we fix that, right? But it's a lot of what we do is pretty reactionary. With things like emerging tech, we're often going to be a step or two behind. And that's probably okay in some ways, but it's important for us to acknowledge and figure out how we're going to act accordingly. Because frankly, I don't think that Los Gatos or many towns like Los Gatos, these smaller towns and cities that don't have, we've got our IT manager and two other people that work in IT, and that's it. Besides them, I don't know how much we're thinking about how artificial intelligence is going to fundamentally change the nature of government. Yeah, I think there's more for us to do in that area.
Yeah, I think that's a great perspective. And I would encourage cities to look at how it cannot replace staff jobs, but how can it speed up somebody's job? How can it make public information requests take a lot less time? Because, you have AI answering that and pulling up documents, and maybe somebody reviews it, but it doesn't become 80% of their job, or answering calls and questions. And then I love that you talked about there are some really cool public safety technologies for early detection of wildfires and prevention. And it's good to see a city get involved versus just relying on the county fire department for some of that. Anything else before I let you go that I should ask that you want to share with us?
No, I appreciate all of this. I think it's great to provide this opportunity for people that are interested in government to learn from other places, other cities, other municipalities. I think one of the things that I've learned in my time in government, and especially as I'm thinking more and more about in Los Gatos, we rotate the mayor, right? It's not, let me write that out, but that's just how it goes. Barring me committing any crimes or doing anything horrible, I think I'll probably be the mayor of Los Gatos next year. I'm looking to resources like what you're doing to learn from best practices in other cities and learn from mayors and successful city administrators and people who care about this stuff, how to do what I do better. And so I really appreciate that what you do to spread the word and be an evangelist for local government a little bit and figure out how we can all learn from each other and do better. Yeah, I'll keep listening to the guests you have on and figuring out how we can make Los Gatos that much better.
I appreciate that. And even for me sitting here, it's been like a PhD in local government, which I've focused on my whole life and career. But just hearing everybody's insights and ideas and the way they conduct themselves, yeah, I appreciate every guest that's come on. So I appreciate that. Rob Moore from the city of Los Gatos, I appreciate you joining me.
Thanks.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.